All right, the next leg that we want to look at in this study is what we call trigger patterns and associations. So let's talk about associations first. And to do that, we'll look at some perhaps non-pornography examples to help us understand the workings of our brains and our minds in regards to association. So our brain largely operates through memory and association. For example, you may hear a song playing on the radio from when you were a teenager, and if it was a good time in your life, then you will associate the song with good feelings and you'll feel good. But if it was an unhappy time, then you'll connect the song to bad times and feel bad. And over the years, I've observed that many church people's favourite songs are those that were popular around the time of their conversion, which was a happy and significant time, and it was memorable. So perhaps we associate having unlocked doors in our home with a feeling of danger if we grew up in an area or a suburb with social problems. So we find ourselves checking the door all the time, but we associate maybe evening, darkness or whatever with a particular feeling. So let's look at the connection between association and addiction. Now imagine you're going through a period of time where you're stressed, you're under load, and as a result you're feeling a bit tired and run down. Now one day you happen to have a drink of caffeinated soda drink or whatever you would like to call that sort of lemonade type thing. So the caffeine and sugar give you a bit of a boost and you feel a bit happier and a little bit more energized. Now your brain stores this information in a little file entitled feeling flat and what to do about it. Now that's put in the limbic system area of your chemical brain, and the next time you feel flat, your brain does a data search on information relating to dealing with this particular problem. And right on the top of the list is a record that drinking caffeinated soda gave you a boost and made you feel a little bit better in the past. So your brain's kept a record and created an association or a connection between tiredness and the boost that you received from the drink. Now clearly, if you continue to be tired, you'll continue to access that file titled, "What do I do if I'm feeling flat?" Now before long, you've developed a habit, and if you serve the habit long enough, over time it becomes an addiction. And remember, in this case, there's certainly chemicals involved. So it's important to create God habits and associations, like a certain time of day, you begin to read your Bible or something like that, and you avoid developing unhealthy habits which end up with mastery over us. Incidentally, we're not trying to be religious here, suggesting for a moment that drinking caffeinated soda is sin. We're just using it as a possibility for an example of the workings of associations and addiction. We do, however, recognise that it's important not to create habits that potentially get out of control, and it's a good thing, I think, if we model ourselves on the advice and wisdom of the Apostle Paul, who said in 1 Corinthians 6:12, he said, "Well, everything's permissible for me, but not everything's beneficial." In other words, he's allowed to do and have anything. That's not a problem. And then he goes on to say, "And everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything." So in other words, he's refusing to come under the power of serving or regular submission to anything, thereby creating a habit. And in verse 13, he goes on to say, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, but God will destroy them both. In other words, they're certainly not the main thing that we should be living for. And he says, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. So, all right, having put that in context, let's also note here that although not related to our subject, that sugar drinks may produce a short-term lift in energy and making you feel good, but it's pretty well documented scientifically that sugar abuse will actually make you tired, and it's reportedly very damaging to organs such as your thyroid gland. Part of the role of the thyroid is to help with energy metabolism and dealing with sugars and things like that. So as with many things that are on offer to us that are supposedly good, in fact, they damage us and they do the opposite in the long run. So eventually that might give us a lift, but then we'll have a longer period of being tired afterwards. So things appear to be good, but in the long run, often they're bad. And if you don't believe me, you can check on this with Adam and Eve when you get to heaven. They saw that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was good for certain things, but it actually turned out in the long run to be bad for them. Porn in the short term may appear to be exciting, even as with the Garden of Eden, seemingly what you need to make you happy, but in the long run, it's a terrible, mind-destroying bondage. And Proverbs 6:25 says, "Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes, for the prostitute reduces you to a loaf of bread, and the adulteress preys upon your very life." So it's life-sapping, destroying your mind and certainly your peace and happiness and being able to think about good things. All right, let's talk about memory-based associations, addictive behaviour, and the trigger patterns that set those off. All right, sometimes your brain establishes a habit that you believe is in your best interests or perhaps is pleasurable or seemingly beneficial in some way. Let's take a very common addiction, cigarette smoking. Now, in my teenage years, it seemed like that most young people smoked. Fortunately, today it's not like that, but it was desirable to fit into the social set or group, and it produced some chemical enjoyment at times. But the nicotine was very addictive. It has very addictive properties, and so many people attribute the difficulty in giving up to this chemical cycle. But the reality is that your amazing body clears this chemical out of your system relatively quickly, and the real problem is, the main problem, the trigger patterns and associations that have been established with the habit. For example, most smokers would consider that they just have a cigarette when they feel like one. They just think, well, I just go looking for my cigarettes and I just want one. But what's mostly happening is that they're having an association with particular situations that cause them to think they want to have a cigarette. For instance, they believe once they believe that they enjoy a smoke or a cigarette after a meal, then this goes in the "when do I have a smoke" file. Okay, and so now when they have a meal, their brain makes the association. So the meal is the trigger, and it makes the association, and there's an unconscious prompt that there is something that they should be doing, namely, in this case, having a smoke or a cigarette. Now, for some, it's when they're driving, their morning cup of tea, after working hard, listening to music, perhaps having a social drink, or perhaps when they're feeling anxious or rejected. There's a long list of potential triggers and things that smoking is associated with that goes on and on and on. And for the smoker who has anxiety, it's an all-the-time problem because his anxiety, which is the stressor or the trigger, is virtually continuous. All right, so how does this relate to porn addiction? Okay, porn has begun with exposure to material that produces intense emotional excitement and chemical response. It's like a little trauma for your brain, or a big trauma for your brain. And this chemical element, we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail in the next leg. But in order to be free, it's necessary to break down the associations that trigger the behaviour. Now, for many men, this could be sexual rejection from the wife who's tired, or maybe she's uninterested. Perhaps she's unable to engage because of her own historical issues relating to previous sexual experiences, or even maybe could include beliefs stemming from a religious background or setting where she or he has been taught that sex is dirty or bad. Okay, so as with other addictions, a part of the power of the bondage to porn is association. For example, imagine a young man goes to his laptop computer or his phone to check his emails. Now, before he gets to his mailbox, he's confronted with the advertisements on the homepage of his internet service provider. So maybe there are ads to click on and to see, for example, Victoria's Secrets, which I believe is some kind of skimpy underwear fashion show. I remember way back, probably 20 years ago now or more, when I first connected to the internet, there was an ad on my web supplier's homepage suggesting that if you click on a link, you can check out the latest Grid Girls, which was the racing car girls. And the Grid Girls were, by the picture, enticing you to investigate pretty young ladies in small bikinis who started the car races. Now, I never did click on there for a look, and later learned how to bypass the homepage and you can just go straight into your mailbox. But if you don't know how to do that, find out. Otherwise, the ads will be there tempting you to have a look. The point is that understanding how association works is a defense. Now, if I'd let curiosity get the better of me, gone onto the site and been perhaps visually stimulated by whatever was on those pages, I would have created an association between myself and my computer, which then would have been something I couldn't deal with if I wanted to continue to use it for my working situation. So from that time on, if I was then thinking of doing work on my laptop, or I opened it up and turned it on, there would have been an automatic reminder and connection that it was not merely a laptop anymore, but now it was an instrument of potential sexual gratification and arousal. All right, so let's talk about breaking the media link if it has happened, because many men have, and probably women, have unwittingly created an association between their laptop, or nowadays a smartphone, and they've created an association between that and their sexuality. So my advice to them in regards to this media link is to deal with it harshly and with finality. It's not something to play around with. Jesus said that if your eye is the problem that's causing you to sin, get rid of it. If it's your hand that's causing you to sin, get rid of it. If it's your laptop or smartphone, get rid of it. Throw it over the fence. If you have a job that needs a laptop and you can't get control, get yourself a job digging ditches where you don't need a laptop anymore. Matthew 5:29 is very serious about this. It says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Then it goes on to say, it's better for you. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. That's pretty serious stuff. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So it reinforces that. In other words, you're better off doing this than spending eternity in hell. I'm not saying that you're going to hell because you're addicted to porn, but I'm suggesting that you might be in a bad place if you're not interested in taking the necessary steps that indicate that you're repentant. If you're not doing anything about it, you're simply accepting it. If you are repentant and you are wanting to give it up, then you are under grace. But if you're willfully sinning and have no conviction at all about what you're doing, then you may have some problems. Now, the Bible says in Hebrews 10, verse 26, it says, if we deliberately keep on sinning after we've received the knowledge of truth, no sacrifice for sins is left. Serious. But only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Now, we know that God's grace is super abundant if we don't like our sin, but if we just don't care and we're doing it, we're in a bad place. The word that's translated as deliberately sin, or in the New King James it says willfully sin, from the Greek language word means voluntarily. Now remember, we've mentioned often Romans chapter 7, we know that at times Paul did what he did not want to do, and he says it's sin living in him. So he's talking about sin. So his reborn human spirit and renewed mind was conflicting with his pre-programmed soul and heart and things that were already there. So what I'm saying is that there was sin that was in him that was happening involuntarily. So remember, it's talking about voluntary sin, and that his new creation nature was not willfully wanting it to happen. Now, this is not to justify an addiction, but to acknowledge that once captive, although all sin is deliberate and voluntary to some extent, that if the person is bound but they're inwardly groaning, it's like Paul was saying what a wretched man he is, and confessing his sin, then God's faithful to forgive. If, as I say, in their sin they're feeling a wretched person as Paul did, then it's evident that they're repentant, although they're in need of help to be made free. Okay? So I'm not saying if you're addicted to porn, you're going to hell, but I'm saying you actually need to be very serious about how you deal with it and on being dedicated to getting set free. Now, I have found that the men who make the necessary decision to break the links and associations by radically dealing with their media, they tend to get free. It's a sort of an outward sign, if you like, of an inward decision. And this often means saving their marriage and keeping their family. But those who try to justify or rationalise it will most likely remain permanently bound or until they're prepared to bear fruit in keeping with repentance. And these men very often lose their families, and even if single, they never overcome the guilt and find peace and joy. So I used to have a bag of smartphones in my office from those who were repentant, and it was great to observe the blossoming relationships as a result of this commitment to freedom. Now, phones without internet connection capabilities are still available, and wives are more than willing to share their computers with husbands who are walking away from this illness and seriously dedicated to being free. After a suitable time of abstinence, it may be possible for some to return to media, having established self-control over their weakness. But this would involve fully understanding that even one slip-up renews and recreates the association. Equally, each time you use your media equipment and do not view anything, your mind files it now as something that is not used for sexual gratification and strengthens the position. But a key here may be to make up your mind before you even turn the item on. And you'll know in your heart if you're trying to deceive yourself and you actually intend to visit the past. Now, if you've allowed yourself even a brief thought about what you may view, then you have gone too far. You need to set a deep default decision by thinking it through that it's not for you, and that's it. Not I'll do it less. It has to be I will never do it again. And Jeremiah 17:9 says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so in other words, you can be going, oh, well, and you're kind of half shutting things out. You know, I'm going to go on the computer. But underneath, you know, really when you're on there, you're secretly going to go and try to look for material. All right, verse 10 of Jeremiah 17 passage says, I, the Lord, search the heart, and I test the mind as well, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doing. So God can't be mocked. If we're sowing to that, we'll reap what we sow. All right, let's just finish with a couple of other ways that association is relevant to pornography. Now, for some men, the trigger comes when an association is made between an empty house and watching pornography. So the wife says that she's going to do the shopping, and his mind connects him with the, what do I do when I have the house to myself memory file. Okay, now at the top of the list is an opportunity for going to the internet to watch porn. So the very fact that his wife's gone shopping reminds him that this is an opportunity for porn. Okay, for some men or women, it's the workplace. Reportedly, a high percentage of viewing is done where people work. Some companies have actually found that as a result of putting all of their materials on computers or tablets that they've lost productivity because the people associate these machines with sexual gratification, and so they tend to be watching porn when they should be working. Instead of, as I say, using the work programs, their employees are found to be watching porn. So simply going to work can trigger use by association. Okay, when we come back, we're going to have a look at the next leg to do with addiction and chemical cycles. All right, we'll see you when we come back.